Welcome, welcome, welcome to a special communication window, or shall we call it the tampering window edition of the 3DownNation podcast. Boys, it was going fast and furious on Sunday, and I do actually care how your Sunday went because both you guys absolutely crushed it. JC was like John Stockton out here, although a little bit chubbier, initiating, distributing, setting us up for alley-oops, slam dunks. My goodness, JC, what a performance. And then Johnny Hodge there with that beard out in the peg, breaking some big-time stories. My guys, you were absolutely on fire. So I am happy to hear about your Sundays, just that one Sunday in particular, though.
Hey, I thought it was a great day for 3DownNation. Obviously, props to you, Justin. Between the three of us, we all got to break some stuff, and a lot of it was some of the bigger stories, which is great. It's what we want to do for the people and the tampering window, whatever you want to call it. It's an exciting time. It's a weird time because, of course, teams aren't allowed to really confirm or talk about these deals that definitely were negotiated right as the window started, not a second before. So it's fun times. It makes for a challenge. But hey, at 3DownNation, we like a challenge. We're never afraid.
Are you implying, Hodge, that there was communication before the communication window?
Of course not.
Tampering before the tampering window?
I'm offended you just said that. Next question.
Man, that is... Those are some serious allegations, Hodge. I don't think anyone would put two and two together there.
If JC is John Stockton, if we'll call him that, then who gets to be Carl Malone? There's nobody cares about anybody else.
Nobody wants to be Carl Malone. No.
Well, fair enough. I think there are some allegations. I don't want to get into that.
On this.
That's why I just talked about John Stockton, Hodge. Come on.
Fair enough.
He was, though. He was the facilitator, was the word that I was looking for. This guy was an absolute monster behind the scenes, dishing out assists. You got to have those glue guys, and it's an absolute pleasure working with you guys. Just so good, man. I appreciate you boys so much. So we're going to go around the Canadian Football League and talk about either signings that have happened or contracts that have been agreed upon. We'll start with the teams that made the most amount of moves and work our way down to the bottom of the list. So we start in the nation's capital with the Ottawa Redblacks, who were the busiest team in the negotiation window, agreeing to terms with 11 players as of Wednesday afternoon Eastern Time, including 4 key members from the defending Grey Cup champion Saskatchewan Roughriders, Canadian linebacker A.J. Allen, global pass rusher Habakkuk Baldonado, all CFL strong side linebacker C.J. Rivas, and backup quarterback Jake Mayer. Also joining the team are East Division All-Star running back Greg Bell, American receiver Aiden Eberhardt, defensive lineman Dylan Wynn, cornerback Demario Houston, and core special teamers Brian Cole II and Scott Hutter, plus Michael Broderick. Is that the foundation for a turnaround by the Redblacks in 2026?
I think it could be, right? We talked about this on the show last week, and we said that the team that had to be the most active in free agency was the Redblacks. And this was a team that looked like it was building towards the end of 2024. And I mean, I think there's some valid reasons with injury, things like that, why things went off the rails in 25. But obviously the foundation that was set in 2024 did not grow into 2025. It crumbled like paper mache in 2025. So I think resetting that is good. I really, really like some of these signings. I mean, they added 5 of our top 20 pending free agents, which is great. Some of them I'm not as high on. We'll start with my favorites. A.J. Allen, brilliant signing. This is a team that we talked about this move potentially happening last episode. They've got some really nice Canadian depth pieces in that linebacking core. Lucas Cormier, for my money, being the best one. So you've got the built-in depth. Now you've got the starter, right? And whether it was Davion Taylor, whether it was Frankie Griffin, there was a bunch of guys who kind of poked in and out of the lineup at that spot last year. Was a bit up in the air. I think A.J. Allen's going to be a huge difference maker for that new look linebacking core. And as we caught at Grey Cup, I think AJ Allen is someone with an infectious, larger than life personality, super smart, like super sharp guy. I think you can market around him, and that's something Ottawa definitely needed. I'm not saying free agency should be about building personalities and branding, but it certainly doesn't hurt when a super talented player you're adding brings that element, right? CJ Rivas, super versatile. This team has struggled with injuries at the safety spot the last few years. Darius Pickett left at Sam. Boom. CJ Rivas, a guy who can fill all those spots. And Greg Bell, super dynamic. I think he's an upgrade over William Stanback. A solid player, don't get me wrong, but I think Bell's got fresher legs and is better out of the backfield. The concern for me, the only knock that I would say is I would have loved to see this team take a bit of a bigger swing at the quarterback position than Jake Maier. Jake Maier, super high floor as a quarterback, but I also think is a very low ceiling. I think somebody like a Trey Ford could potentially bring a higher ceiling into the building. I also thought somebody like Taylor Powell was maybe a better option to become a future franchise guy. And the other thing I would have liked to see from Ottawa is addressing the offensive line. This is a team that was not good enough in the trenches this past year. 2 of our top 3 pending free agents were along the offensive line, Jarrell Broxton and Coulter Woodmansee. We'll get into those guys a little more later in the show, but obviously neither ended up in Ottawa. So I think the Redblacks did really well. Again, I like a lot of the signings, but I would have liked to see them make a bit more of a dynamic play at the quarterback spot. I would have liked them to see invest at the offensive line position, but all in all, I'd give them, if I were to grade it, solid B, maybe a B+ for the work they did. I thought it was a good job.
I think that's a valid critique when it comes to the offensive line. I would like to see some pieces added there, but there's lots of offensive and defensive line talent in this year's CFL draft. Perhaps that is an area where they will look to continue to build in the nation's capital. As for the rest of these moves, I thought they were absolutely slam dunks, one after another after another. Even the Jake Maier signing, to me, this is exactly what the Ottawa Redblacks need, because you've got Drew Brown, who hopefully is your franchise quarterback that you still have some degree of belief in, but if he gets hurt again or he struggles, Jake Maier is exactly the type of quarterback that Ryan Dinwiddie has proven time and time again that he can get the most out of. He can be this year's Nick Arbuckle if you need him to be that, as a guy who has starting experience, sort of lost the plot on that part of his career and is now trying to get back there. I think he's a fantastic pickup. CJ Rivas, I think you can argue, is maybe even an upgrade over a Darius Pickett at strong side linebacker, which was a point of real concern when he left. Habakkuk Baldonado, I think, has an incredibly high ceiling to put opposite Bryce Carter. I think that addresses one of your real needs from last year, and even a more unheralded signing, somebody like an Aiden Eberhardt, who I think teams would have been misplaced if they went out to try and make him a number 1 target based on his production in BC, but has proven that he can be a very nice complementary piece in an offense that has a lot of weapons. Well, now he joins up with Justin Hardy and Eugene Lewis and Khalil Pimpleton, and he can be that 3rd or 4th or even 5th guy in that offense, depending on what you need, and threaten deep and make the most of the big plays, just like he did with the Lions. I love every move that Sean Burke and Ryan Dinwiddie made during this period, and I think it's going to make this team a lot better next season.
What grade would you put on it, JC? Hodge said a B.
I'd put this as an A- easily. Could it have been better? Theoretically, yes, but I think they did exceptional work across the board.
I think that there's a little bit too much focus here on the offensive line, because if the Redblacks are healthy up front, I think the group that they have right now is really good. And look what Ryan Dinwiddie was able to do last year in Toronto. Like, Nick Arbuckle was on pace for 5,000 yards behind an offensive line that we would all agree did not play very well, to say the least. So I think Ottawa took a look at it and probably said, let's invest our money elsewhere, because we've already invested in the offensive line to a degree when you look at the guys from left tackle to right tackle, especially if they're healthy. So I thought the Redblacks went out and hit a home run with what they did. Ryan Dinwiddie said they were going to be aggressive. They held to that Sean Burke did his thing, obviously, to help Dinwiddie out. First time in the GM chair for Dinwiddie. And I'll give them a rock solid A for what they did. I said on the pod last week that they at least needed to add one impact defender at every level of the defense. Well, they did that and then some. They go out and get Habakkuk Baldonado, who I'll agree with JC, I still think has some untapped upside. Last year, Saskatchewan started 5 games, dressed in 18, 17 defensive tackles, 4 sacks, and he was being moved around when Malik Carney was out of the game for Saskatchewan as that versatile chess piece that Corey Mace trusted. Line up at D end, line up inside and rush the passer, line up at linebacker. He's a very versatile piece, and you don't necessarily have to pay the premium like you would have for Malik Carney, I think, because Baldonado is still on the rise and has some untapped potential. Then you look about A.J. Allen. Hodge talked about that well. He's a certified ratio breaker. And no, I'm not just saying that because he went to the University of Guelph. He took a massive leap. Yes, drink. He took a massive leap last year with Saskatchewan, and I think he's going to continue to do his thing in Ottawa. The bonus came from getting CJ Rivas at strong side linebacker because that guy is still playing at an all CFL level, and we know he can go in the secondary, especially at safety, and get it done for you there at a high level too. And then you go out and add Demario Houston, who I think helps out the secondary in Ottawa to really beef up this defense. Plus, you put Dylan Wynn there, who might not be what he was a number of years ago, especially I think it was in 2019. He had a whole bunch of sacks. I believe it was 11. But he's a serviceable guy, I think even more than that, who knows how to win a championship. And depth, special teams pieces aren't necessarily sexy, but you guys have talked about it on the podcast in the past, that Ottawa had some of those guys that were getting long in the tooth while they went out and replenished that core with Cole and Hutter and who's the third one? Broderick, yeah, who's an ultra athletic linebacker that might even have upside in the future to potentially give you some starting depth or start. So I thought what Ottawa did was an A grade from my perspective. And you have to think at the quarterback position, guys, that Ryan Dinwiddie got the guy that he wanted as a backup. You would have to imagine that. Hodge, I can understand your opinion on some of the other quarterbacks that were potentially available out there, but you would have thought that, okay, if the Redblacks wanted to re-sign Dustin Crum, that they potentially could have gotten that done, or if they wanted to go after Taylor Powell, who Sean Burke maybe didn't cross over with Powell in Hamilton. Let's scrub that from the record. But you would have to think that they would have at least studied the tape on him, and then Dinwiddie would have said, okay, Jake Mayer is the guy that we want. So you look all around, and I think Ottawa went from a team that had a lot of question marks to a team that I look at least on paper now, you got to go out and play the games and say, okay, that could be a really competitive group. And every team's going to say it. If they stay healthy and if Drew Brown plays at a relatively high level, especially with Ryan Dinwiddie coaching him, Ottawa absolutely had the best communication window / free agency period.
I think we should also note that the only 2 departures reportedly that are happening in Ottawa is Dustin Crum and Robert Priester. And I want to note that because I think sometimes, you get enamored by 6 guys who are coming into an organization and they might be 6 great additions, but if there's 8 great players departing, maybe it wasn't on a net level actually great free agency. So I thought when you look at the list of guys who are departing, obviously being not exactly a list of gangbusters, and then you've got a ton of talent coming into Ottawa, that does make it more impressive. Edmonton Elks general manager Ed Hervey continued to be active in the tampering period, named in his honor, which apparently he doesn't take issue with, agreeing to terms with 7 additions. He triple dipped on former Hamilton offensive linemen with Coulter Woodmansey, Brendan Bordner, and Jordan Murray, along with a new backup QB in Taylor Powell and a Canadian receiver in Brendan O'Leary Orange. Defensive end Malik Carney and receiver Joe Robustelli are also making their way over from Saskatchewan. Will this be the year that free agency splashes work for the green and gold?
I really like the moves that Hervey made here. Now, I don't think it was as dramatic as we saw a year ago when I think they added 8 starters 6 of whom I think were Canadian on that first day of the tampering window. That was a complete redefinition of the organization. That's not what we have here, but I think they've added some really nice pieces. Coulter Woodmansey is going to help them get better up front along the offensive line that struggled last year and will help facilitate potentially Carter O'Donnell, who was very good in coming back from the NFL at guard last year, moving out to tackle. I think that's a possibility in making Brett Boyko the sixth man there. And then, at offensive tackle, Martez Ivey struggled last year. You've got some options now to potentially replace him or at least push him. Were either Bordner or Murray fantastic last year for the Hamilton Tiger Cats? No, they weren't. In fact, Bordner got benched in favor of Murray at the end of the season. But you have a situation now where you've got options. You've got those two guys who have already battled with each other and gone back and forth that can give you that flexibility to either slide them in over Ivy, or if you've got to go with multiple American tackles for whatever reason, if that's your best setup, you have that option now as well. And we know that Hervey likes both sides of the trenches. To me, there is no greater slam dunk in all of free agency, perhaps, than Malik Carney. I think he's an exceptional defensive end, such an underrated part of that Riders team that won the Grey Cup last year. Should have been an all-star by every metric in my mind, even though he doesn't necessarily put up crazy sack numbers. He is disruptive on a down-to-down basis. I think he is going to vastly improve that defensive line, which saw some younger players emerge last year and now is sneaky deep in my estimation.
I'll focus on Joe Robustelli because I think that's an under-the-radar signing that could really pop for Edmonton, who needed help at the receiver position. They were able to sign Austin Mack after he was released prior to an offseason roster bonus by the Montreal Alouettes. So you would imagine that he'll be their bona fide number one guy, especially with the relationship that he has with Cody Fajardo. But Robustelli's a guy that was essentially caught up in a numbers game in Saskatchewan. There was a whole bunch of great receivers, and yeah, I say great receivers there in Saskatchewan, American and Canadian. And it was hard for him to get on the field, even after he had a 191-yard game against the Calgary Stampeders, who had the best defense, at least to start the season last year. So I really think Robustelli has some untapped upside. Trevor Harris has compared him to Greg Ellingson. I think if he can earn a starting opportunity there in Edmonton, which seems likely, that he could be a guy that you're looking back on and saying that was a real great get for Edmonton during the communication window. JC, I think you covered all the other guys in a great way, but I'll just double down on Malik Carney because I saw it up close and personal in stadium watching those Roughriders games. Carney was absolutely a monster from a disruptive standpoint. Corey Mace moved him all over the place. He was rushing inside, rushing outside, dropping back as a linebacker, coming off the edge as a linebacker. Mace used him all over. And he was a guy that was able to consistently affect the offensive plays that he was seeing, be it run plays, be it pass plays, getting after the passer. I think he has one of the highest, if not the highest, disruptive rates in terms of pressuring the quarterback last year. So that was a guy I thought that was a big need for Edmonton to upgrade that pass rush and make sure it's more consistent. So those are the two names that jump out to me. And I don't know why. I usually don't grade this stuff, but I feel like I'd give Edmonton a really good B+ for what they did.
How high is a really good B+ versus just a regular B+?
Just a good feeling B+, you know? Like you're on the
like the parents expected a C and you got a B+.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
They didn't expect an A+ and you got a B+.
I'm just teasing. Austin Mack, we got to talk about him. He was not added during the window, but he signed officially a few days before it. And obviously that gives Edmonton a much needed number one target. I said this on multiple Edmonton radio stations this week, so I'll reiterate it here. It felt like at times last season, I'm not saying there wasn't talent in the receiving corps, but at times last year, it felt like Cody Fajardo was throwing the ball to just a bunch of guys. right?
Mhm.
And having Austin Mack, who, did not have the best 2025 season. I think he'd be the first to admit that with some of the injuries he was battling. But a guy who took the league by storm in 2023 and obviously did so with Cody Fajardo as his quarterback in Montreal. The sky's the limit there. And with him taking that kind of number one role, I think Robustelli is great to slot in to that 2-3 spot. You've still got Keon Julian Grant, who can take the top off a defense. So I'm excited to see what this Edmonton offense looks like with that. I'm super excited to see what the O-line looks like. Like, this team had a real need at right guard that they filled last year when Carter O'Donnell came back from the NFL. Now, I had sources indicate that the plan long-term was to push him out to right tackle, but Brett Boyko is still on this team, the incumbent right tackle. The incumbent left tackle, Martez Ivey, is still on this team. And then, of course, as JC astutely laid out, you've got Murray and you've got Bordner, guys who are used to jockeying for the starting left tackle position on the same team, now doing it in Edmonton rather than Hamilton, where they were together last time. So that's going to be an interesting battle. And then you've got Coulter Woodmansee, a top O lineman. I think he's going to be the highest paid O lineman in the CFL in 2026. So Edmonton had to pay through the nose to get him. But Ed Hervey reiterates it every time he's asked. He wants to get better in the trenches. That is the spot where he wants to spend his money, and he has done that. David Beard is an expensive incumbent. Mark Corte is an expensive incumbent, and they've just added the biggest ticket piece in Coulter Woodmansee. So I like Edmonton's willingness to get better there. It's hard to get better at the offensive line position. It's very expensive, but they did it. Their departures include Broderick, who I think, after being the number 2 pick a few years ago, needed a change of scenery. Jonathan Kongbo, who's a solid rotational guy. Devondrick Bynum, who missed most of this last season because he was hurt. The big departure for me is Jake Serezna. Though, with Noah Curtis coming back from a torn ACL, I think it would be easy for Edmonton to make one of those two interior defensive spots a Canadian spot. So that doesn't worry me too much. I do think this team will miss Tanner Green, who retired on special teams, but he's a guy who you can look at the draft, I think, to potentially get better at, right? There's not a lot of fullbacks on the open market. I would look for Edmonton to go to the draft there. But all in all, I think Edmonton did well. I would give them an A-. Why not?
I think they already have their replacement for Tanner Green in-house because they had Skylar Griffith on that roster.
That's true.
All last year, despite him being hurt. I got laughed at when I put him in my top 25 for my CFL draft rankings. I think he went 22nd, even though he was hurt, to Edmonton because they liked him that much. He can be a beast on special teams and replace Tanner Green. If they want other options, it is a low-key exceptional draft. If you need a fullback tight end type, there are lots of options out there. The one name you didn't talk about, Hodge, and you didn't mention either, Duncan, I didn't mention, is Taylor Powell, right? I think they get more consistent at backup quarterback here behind Cody Fajardo. It's clear that Fajardo is the face of the franchise right now, but Powell is somebody that the administration there is going to trust. Many of them, including Ed Hervey, were with him in his early years in Hamilton when he was thrust into the starting lineup as a rookie. They've seen what he can do. He has developed the last number of years under Scott Milanovich with the Ticats, and I think he will give them a competent backup option should anything happen to Cody next season. I think that's the type of stability you need when you're moving on from a guy like Trey Ford. The Hamilton Tiger Cats bided their time, but landed two of the biggest names in free agency with Canadian quarterback Trey Ford and perennial All-CFL linebacker Wynton McManus already officially signed. Some depth additions joined the Ticats as well in offensive tackle Eric Lofton, Canadian pass rusher Kenny Onyeka, and national receiver Tyson Middlemost. Did the Tabbies do what was needed to keep contending out east?
It's possible, but I think, and Hodge will detail this better than me, you got to look at the departures in Hamilton, which include Devin Verasuk signing with the Indianapolis Colts. So that created a major void for the Ticats at middle linebacker, which obviously Wynton McManus fills probably and then some, especially with the leadership that he has there. So I think that can really help the defense. Obviously, I'm most curious to see what happens there with Trey Ford, but I think there's some question marks in Hamilton in terms of their Canadian depth, which went into the season last year even a little thin from that standpoint. And losing a guy like Deshaun Amos is possibly going to hurt in the secondary. Now, perhaps as all the teams, and I think we should say this for context, have guys in-house that they've been developing that they think could potentially step up. But I think there are a couple question marks in Hamilton, the ones that I laid out, the guys that left, and their Canadian depth. That said, there are still some guys on the market if they feel like they wanted to supplement either of those question marks. But let's focus on the quarterback position for a moment, because you guys just talked about Taylor Powell. And, I have a hard time believing if Scott Milanovich really thought Powell was the future in Hamilton, that he would let him walk out the building. So I'm curious to see when the contract numbers come out, because that'll probably tell a lot of the reason behind it. That said, Milanovich appears to be, at least in his statements, pretty high on Trey Ford and giving him the opportunity to be the heir apparent to Bo Levi Mitchell. He was always direct, as Milanovich is, in saying that he's going to have to earn everything that he gets with the Tiger Cats and with Scott Milanovich himself. But I am intrigued to see what Milanovich can do with Trey Ford and how he can develop him potentially for the future. Bo Levi Mitchell has told us that he's essentially year to year at this point. So I think you need that guy. And from a marketing standpoint, man, it's a home run for the Tiger Cats. Trey Ford from Niagara Falls, which is, about an hour away from Hamilton, went to the University of Waterloo, which is, about an hour away from Hamilton. It's almost equidistant. So you bring him back home. I think you can market him. I would imagine there's going to be Trey Ford jerseys purchased, even though he's going to go into 2026 as the backup. So I'm most curious to see how that plays out from all perspectives, because I talked to Trey Ford for about 35 minutes one-on-one. You can find it on the current podcast feed or on the YouTube channel, whatever one you're catching up with us on. And he seemed to be more mature, let's say. Not that I think he was mature coming into the CFL, but the way that he spoke about leaving Edmonton, I thought was pretty blunt and forthcoming. He sort of understood that he was probably going to be released with that $110,000 roster bonus looming, and he was open to a fresh start. And I think this is an ideal one if you're Trey Ford for a couple of reasons. You can go and learn from Scott Milanovich, who has tutored guys like Trevor Harris, Zach Collaros, Cody Fajardo, who are still starting quarterbacks in this league to this day. And oh, by the way, Anthony Calvillo and Ricky Ray as well. Plus, he did what he said he was going to do. He helped Bo Levi Mitchell have a resurgence. So if Trey Ford can earn the trust of Scott Milanovich, I think that's going to prove that Ford could have a long career if he puts in the work and continues to develop in Hamilton.
I think you're bang on about Ford. I will also say a couple of years ago, I wrote an opinion column about why Edmonton and Hamilton should trade backup quarterbacks. In other words, Trey Ford going to Hamilton and Taylor Powell going to Edmonton. And apparently these two teams read it and were like, we should do this, but not right away. Let's wait a couple years into free agency. It came to pass. I was laughing my butt off when you broke the story, Justin. I'm like, it's come to fruition. It just took a couple years. Too funny. I will say I like some of these additions for Hamilton. We've sung Wynton McManus's praises on this show a million times. I don't think we have to do it again. Perfect replacement for Devin Verasuk. I think that Kenny Onyeka, solid depth piece. Tyson Middlemost, solid depth piece. I'm interested, by the way, he's incumbent, not a free agent addition, but we should note Tyler Ternowski, who has been great on teams for this team the last little bit, receiver, was the number one receiver of Trey Ford back with the Waterloo Warriors. So I'm excited to see if that connection gets rekindled at all. It's so cool that those guys were lighting it up, 5, 6, 7 years ago with the Warriors, and now might be doing it with the Ticats, and wearing the same colors even. Like, come on. I think also Chris Kolonkowski, who was signed ahead of time following his release from the Bombers. Nice add to replace Coulter Woodmanseel on the offensive line. That said, guys, this is the list of departures for this team. Deshaun Amos, Greg Bell, Brendan Bordner, Brian Cole, Jonathan Moxey, Jordan Murray, Taylor Powell, Coulter Woodmansey, Brendan O'Leary-Orange. Like, a lot of these guys played pretty darn significant roles on this team in 2025. Like Greg Bell, 1,000-yard receiver. Jonathan Moxey wasn't
Rusher.
named.
Rusher.
What did I say?
Receiver.
Oh, my apologies. 1,000-yard rusher in 2025. Jonathan Moxey was not named All CFL. I thought he arguably could have been. I thought he was great for them at corner, had a real renaissance season. Brendan O'Leary-Orange, not elite numbers, but still a starting Canadian. Those don't grow on trees. Coulter Woodmansey, a burgeoning All CFL offensive lineman, in my opinion, gone, right? And the offensive tackle position is a tough one to find talent. This team spent a ton of money retaining Quentin Barrow, which I thought was the right option, but I would have liked to see them retain Jordan Murray or Brendan Border to stay on that left side. Eric Lofton is serviceable. I'm not sure I would put him up as high, though, as Murray and Bordner. So I think for that reason, my grade for the Ticats, if I were to give them one, would be lower. I would give this team a C, maybe even a C minus. It would have been uglier had this team not added Wynton McManus. I also think of all the teams, according to our sources, boys, this is the one that has played things more closely to the chest. So when you look at some potential free agents who are still out there, like Curly Gittins Jr., that could be a great addition for this team. But as of right now, it's unclear if any of the guys who have yet to agree to terms have done so with Hamilton. So I reserve the right to up my grade. But the reason I'm a little scared for the Ticats right now is I see, as much as I see some great talent coming in, I see more talent leaving for other teams. And that's a concern for me. I have to be honest.
I'll put it at a C plus for me at this current stage, with the same reservation that you just stated, Hodge, that it could increase if they're able to add a little bit more talent as we move through this window. But I just look at too many holes or weakened areas of this roster. When you look at half of their secondary, essentially, right? The corner and the halfback from one side of their defense, gone. Do they have the guys in-house to replace them? There's some players who have seen some minutes. Quavion Moit, of course, started the playoff game last year when Jonathan Moxey was down. But is he a long-term solution? We'll have to see. I would have liked to see them add something along the defensive line beyond just Kenny Onyeka. Do they have enough there? I'm struggling to find the right number of Canadian starters for this team right now, especially with the loss of a guy like Devin Verisak. As much as I like the linebackers they've got in place, with Wynton McManus coming in, Kyler Fisher and Braxton Hill already there, I think those are two good young players. They'll be competent there. I'm wondering how you replace that Canadian starting spot. To me, that is a concern. And I think a lot of the things that have been raised by both of you are valid as well. The Ticats need a few more pieces. They're going to have to draft well. Lucky for them, I think there is good players on both sides of the line of scrimmage that could help them right away in this CFL draft. But as far as free agency has gone, I don't think that this was a slam dunk by any stretch.
If the Ticats played the Redblacks to open the season on a neutral site, let's say, who would be the favorite?
Oh, jeez. Assuming everybody is healthy?
Yes.
I mean, it'd probably be the Ticats. I would think, but
I might go with the Redblacks at this stage.
Well, hold on. Are we talking about who you personally think would win, or just who would be the favorite according to Vegas?
Who would be the favorite, and then who you think would win?
Okay, I would think that Vegas would have the Ticats, and I'm pleading the fifth on the next one. I'm not getting pinned down on February, whatever it is, February 4th on that. No, there's a lot more to be decided here, bud.
I think your answer at least shows the improvement that the Redblacks have made, which was my point, and
Fair.
Our question marks about the Tiger Cats. And I think, JC, you can question the Canadian depth, and obviously I did, but then you can look at the roster and try to get an idea of where they could start 7 Canadians, possibly 2 on the defensive line,
that is
1 at
wild
safety
to me right now.
3 on the offensive line, and 1 receiver, and then perhaps you go 2 receivers if you could sign a guy like Curly Gittins Jr., who's a legit 1,000-yard starter that's still to be had out there. I think that's an easy move that the Ticats could make if they want to solidify some Canadian depth. And I know you have questions about the D-line. I'm just saying you can see it. I'm not necessarily saying that's a great Canadian 7 to start.
I love the idea of them bringing in Curly Gittins Jr. To me, that would be an exceptional move and would really ease a lot of my concerns. But if you're entering this season with what they currently have on the defensive line and you're saying, I'm going to start 2 Canadians there, to me, you just don't have the guys you can rely on yet. Like Isaiah Bagna, they spent a big draft pick on last year. I will trust that front office on that evaluation. I wasn't particularly high on Bagna, but they liked him. He got some starting minutes early in the year, but got hurt, missed a bunch of his rookie season. Behind him was a guy I really liked that they drafted a year before, Luke Brubaker, but he's been hurt for much of his career. Can you rely on him? Kenny Onyeka, who they brought in, is longer in the tooth. Owen Hubert, not exactly a world beater, although he's had some experience starting when he was with Winnipeg at defensive end. And then at defensive tackle, I mean, Ty Anderson was the guy who played for them last year at that spot in the depth rotational role. And I like him a lot, but is he ready to take that jump to be a starter? Is Kale Dava, coming off of an injury that held him out for most of his rookie year, going to be a guy who can step in and be a rotational piece to facilitate that? I don't know. There are too many questions with these young guys who, quite frankly, an alarming number of them have a history of injury at this stage of their career for me to say that that is a group that I'm comfortable starting 2 with. Could they add a day one bona fide starter in the draft? I think those guys could be out there. And all of a sudden your concerns are eased. But right now, it's just not proven to me.
Yeah, I'll add one thing here, which is Julian Hauser had an absolute unbelievable career year in 2025. And looking at the rest of this D-line in Hamilton right now, for their sake, I'm hoping he has another one in 2026.
I think Philip Osai showed some things, flashes as a rookie, as the other potential D-end. If you were to go with 2 Americans, I liked him and what he showed. But to your point, Hodge, I think they've lost more than they've gained.
Let's see what happens, boys. Everybody was freaking out on Twitter, from Ticats fans at least, that they weren't signing anybody, and then all of a sudden Wynton McManus, boom, comes in there. So there is some high-end talent on that roster. Let's go to the Peg. The Blue Bombers appear to be reloading in the trenches as the Blue and Gold have agreed to terms with all CFL left tackle Jarrell Broxton. You would imagine he's probably going to go to right tackle in Winnipeg. And veteran defensive lineman Jake Serezna, American quarterback Jonathan Moxey, and West Final hero touchdown Tommy Neild rounded out Winnipeg's moves so far. Can these additions catapult the Bombers back into legitimate contention in the West Division?
Yeah, and to me, this group was about righting wrongs in a way. Like, this team never should have let Jermarcus Hardrick go. We all saw what Jermarcus Hardrick, injury riddled in 24, but 2025, I mean, had the ultimate season. He won the Grey Cup, was named all CFL, and won the most outstanding offensive lineman award. Like, it doesn't get any better than that. And I think this was the Bombers going, okay, as much as I thought they got pretty solid production there from Kendall Randolph in 25, Jarrell Broxton is the best pass blocking offensive tackle in the CFL. And presumably with Tommy Condell coming in at OC, they're going to throw the ball more than they did in 2025 and in 2026. So I think that adding Broxton, a guy who's going to cost them $250,000 in 2026, it's an expensive move, but it's a great one. The other added benefit, I think, if you're the Bombers is, okay, Nathan Rourke, we got to play in the same division as the MLP of the league. Well, what can we do? We can steal his blindside blocker and make him run for his life more often than he used to, knowing that he has the best pass blocking offensive tackle in the league, protecting his left side. And I also thought they corrected a huge wrong in not signing Tommy Neild earlier. Like, I thought Tommy Neild was going to go to Winnipeg last year. This was a team that did not have good Canadian depth in its receiving core outside of course, starter Nick Dembski, in my opinion anyway, in 2025. And Tommy Neild's dad played collegiately at the University of Guelph, with head coach Mike O'Shea. And I've been led to believe they still have a relationship as a part of that tight-knit Griffins alumni group. So I'm like, oh, Tommy Neild just helped the Argonauts beat the Bombers in the Grey Cup in 24. He'd be the perfect fit as kind of the physical, possession style receiver that they need. And he went to Saskatchewan, the team that arguably had the best Canadian depth of any team in their receiving core with guys like Keon Schaefer-Baker, Sam Emelis, Mitch Picton, like the list goes on. The Riders didn't need Neal. They signed him. The Bombers should have done it, so they corrected that wrong. And then in terms of the rest of it, I think just Jake Ceresna and Jonathan Moxey fit two perfect spots where the Bombers scouting department just hasn't had a lot of success. Like the Bombers were not good enough at corner in 2025. They have not found an impact defensive tackle in a few years. That's not to say that Jamal Woods didn't have moments. Devin Adams hasn't had moments, but at the end of the day, they needed to upgrade. And I think the really exciting thing for Bombers fans about Jake Ceresna is the fact that he has played out on the edge in addition to playing inside. So if I'm Jordan Younger, who loves to rush 3 on passing downs, you can now say, okay, Willie's going to pin his ears back on one side, Jake Ceresna is going to push the pocket from the other side, and then you can stick whether it's Cam Lawson or whoever else in the middle. So to me, the Bombers list was not huge. Obviously, they signed Tim White before free agency. That gives them the number one receiver they needed. And their losses are not that significant. Jarrett Stearns was okay. James Vaughters, I thought, was okay last year. Ironically, they were the best two free agent additions this team had. The rest they just did not pan out at all. And then, Demerio Houston was fine as a midseason addition, and Eric Lofton started one game. So to me, the Bombers nailed this. I would give them an A.
This is an A for me as well. For all the reasons that you laid out, they hit and checked every box that they needed to. Now, to me, what they're doing along that offensive line, I have some questions about long term. Is it best to move a younger guy like Kendall Randolph, who is still coming into his own as an offensive lineman, and I thought played reasonably well at right tackle, out of the starting lineup, or kick him into guard to facilitate having Broxton and Bryant, who's 40 years old, on the other side? I don't know if long-term that's the best option for you, but certainly it's going to improve this offensive line next year. And I think that's really what Winnipeg wanted. They want a team that can get back into contention. They weren't happy being the crossover squad a year ago, and they want to be back into the mix in the West Division. I think guys like Ceresna and Moxey are going to help them on defense and push them closer to that. And I think Tommy Neal is the best addition of the bunch quietly, because that receiving core in Winnipeg last year was not good. Tim White gets them a lot better. You've got a guy who is reliable in Nick Dempsey. You've got Ontario Wilson back. That's going to help you. And then you had that other Canadian spot where they started out with Kevin Clercius, who everyone was quite high on entering the season, but sort of fell out of favor, and you ended up with Joey Corcoran starting as a rookie out of the University of New Hampshire. To me, that can't continue. You have to have a guy like Tommy Neal, and I think he has a skill set that remains not fully tapped. He has higher to go still in his career. I think he can be a legit starter, and eventually, maybe down the line, if he finds his footing more in Winnipeg, can become a guy who doesn't just become the complement to Nick Dembski, but can eventually replace him once Dembski ages out.
There's lots of upside in Tommy Neal, I believe. And my colleague on the Rider Broadcast Network, Wes Cates, gave him this tag. And I'm not saying I fully believe it, but I can see it. He started calling him Baby Andy Fantus with the way that he plays the game. And that's kind of how Neal works, right? He'll go into those tough areas, make catches in the middle of the field, great at finding the spots in zone, and I think could be trusted, by Trevor Harris. And I really do believe that there's some upside there. Now, Tommy Neal has to stay healthy. I think he knows it. He was able to stay healthy once he got into the lineup last year with Saskatchewan, then on down the stretch, obviously making the key play in the West Final. So if he can stay healthy, which you could say about a lot of players, but perhaps it's just been some bad luck for Tommy Neal, then I think he has all the upside that you guys are talking about and could be one of the really good Canadian slot receivers in the 3-down league.
I will also add, Neal has won 3 Grey Cups. He's 26. That's a crazy stat to me. Most guys finish their careers without a ring. Dude has won 3 And arguably, he just broke out of the West Final with that game-winning touchdown, which is kind of wild. But no, to me, this was a great time for the Bombers. I think it fixed some of their past mistakes. I know a lot of Bomber fans I've talked to are going, why the heck did they not do this when they were hosting the Grey Cup, right? Like, and I would have the same question, but obviously you can't change the past. You could only change the future. And I think the Bombers did a good job of righting those wrongs with this haul. The Toronto Argonauts did much of their heavy lifting before the window opened. JC, you can touch on those signings, but still managed to secure the return of all CFL halfback Deshaun Amos. Meanwhile, fellow defensive back Robert Priester and Canadian defensive lineman Jonathan Kongbo rounded out those who have agreed to terms. Did the Boatmen do enough?
I still don't think that they have done enough, although you cannot assess these moves that were made during the window without talking about what happened before. Dwayne Hendricks, I think, is a great addition to the interior of that defensive line. Peyton Logan gives them an option at returner if Janarian Grant isn't back, which it doesn't look like he is going to be. Dakota Shepley, that addition is massive for that offensive line, and I think it's going to help them immensely. And Adarius Pickett is a stud at strong side linebacker. He's going to immensely upgrade that position. And then you bring in Deshaun Amos, who I think is one of the best halfbacks in the CFL, still at this stage in his career, is a magnet for interceptions, who has deep ties with the organization, played 3 seasons there prior to his stint last year in Hamilton, and I think is going to bring a lot of veteran leadership to the back end that was missing last season. Robert Priester is more of a fill-in option to me than a viable starter at this stage in his career. And Jonathan Kongbo is at best a rotational end to me, somebody who, if Jeremiah Ojo can take the next step in his career and push for starting minutes, gives you depth in behind him. But I still look at those tackle spots with some skepticism. I still look at the defensive line as a place where they need to add a little bit of talent. I think there's more work to be done in Toronto before they can get back to where they need to be. Although I think it does help when you have Chad Kelly coming back 100% healthy to reinvigorate that offense. Although the problems last year weren't really at quarterback.
They need more than a little bit of talent on the defensive line. Who's going to rush the passer?
They need a lot of talent on the defensive line.
And I'm not saying they can't go out and scout and find it, because we've seen teams not do much in free agency in the past and then turn around and win a Grey Cup. Just ask the Montreal Alouettes about that in 2023. So it can be done, but it does look like there is a lack of pass rush ability on this team right now. The tackle spots, as you touched on, JC, 2 major question marks that have yet to be filled. Perhaps there's some guys they've scouted and brought in that they think can step in there as rookies, because we have seen that in recent years. You know, I've seen it in Saskatchewan in back-to-back years with Trevor Reed and then Peyton Collins. So it's possible, but you got to go find those guys. There's an absolute gaping hole at running back. I thought getting in on the Greg Bell sweepstakes would have been smart for Toronto. They don't end up getting him, and he goes to Ottawa. But there are a lot of holes on this Argonauts roster, even though they've had some additions. And I think Dakota Shepley is an absolutely massive one along the offensive line. I wonder if there's a thought that perhaps he could play tackle. I think he's best suited for guard, and he was at guard in the NFL, but could he kick out there? He was a really athletic guy when he started his professional football career, so perhaps there's a thought that he could do that there, and they're paying him a lot of money to come back to the Canadian Football League. But I look at this roster, and there's a bunch of question marks. I'm happy to be proven wrong as the free agency process plays out with some guys that are left out there. But man, this roster needs a real talent infusion. I don't even care if Chad Kelly's 100% healthy. You know, I think there's partially a mental block there with him, and that might have been the reason why they didn't put him on the field at all in 2025. That injury was gruesome, And I need to see Chad Kelly get back to that MOP level until I'm going to believe it because of how bad, just strictly how bad that injury was.
Yeah, this is a team that cut impending starters Darius Bratton and Derek Parrish before free agency. And you kind of go, okay, I wonder who they're going to add to that defensive side of the ball. And the answer, it seems, is just Dwayne Hendricks, at least in the trenches. I mean, Deshaun Amos is a nice add. I think he's going to fill one of those halfback spots really well. Tavares McFadden spent kind of the latter half of that season at halfback. I personally think he's better at corner. Benji Franklin is back at the boundary side. I really like the linebacking core. I think Isaac Dargangelo is ready to start. Cameron Judge is great. And obviously, Darius Pickett is great. But yeah, up front, I have some questions. Anthony Lanier got hurt. He's not been re-signed. Derek Parrish has been cut. Jamin Pelly, still a free agent, right? So I think JC's point about the D-line is well taken. I think Justin's point about the O-line is well taken. At the tackle positions, this team was not good enough in 2025. I will say I am curious to see what comes of Josh Donovan, who started late in the year for the Alouettes in 2024, got hurt, didn't play last season, but was quietly stashed by the Argonauts for 2026. Maybe he's a day one starter at right tackle. But regardless, I was surprised the Argonauts didn't do more. And again, I don't want to completely diss the Argonauts because they did add some big talent before this with Shepley, with Pickett. Dwayne Hendricks, a nice fit on the interior of that defensive line, and Peyton Logan, who didn't perform last year due to injury, but has been very explosive in the past. That being said, yeah, I thought this would be a team that would go out and kind of like Ottawa did, try to add, let's say, 5 guys in our top 20. Well, as of right now, the top ranked pending free agent from our list, which was done before free agency started, that the Argonauts signed was number 23, Deshaun Amos. They did not add a top 20 talent, which, given the fact that they lost 13 games last year, and then their head coach, who's a 2-time Coach of the Year winner, you would think they would want to add more. So I also have questions about the Argonauts. They have a ton of guys who have not necessarily agreed elsewhere. The only 2 departures are McManus and Deshaun Brissett. I will say, having Brissett, a local guy, around for 5 years, waiting for him to break out, and then he finally does, and then you don't re-sign him. I'm like, what are we doing? Like Deshaun Brissett, fine. Like he was number 2 pick. I think it was 2020 or 2021. And he spends 5 years here. He finally has his 900-yard breakout season. It's like, yeah, we don't need him anymore. I was scratching my head. So maybe Curly Gittins Jr. will be heading to Toronto. He's still yet to agree to terms somewhere. I think that would be a smart ad for the Argonauts. But yeah, I have big questions for what the Argonauts are doing. I'm not going to bury them with an F, but I would give them a C or a C- probably for how they handled this segment. As much as you got to love some of the additions.
One name I want to point out, we're talking about the tackles, is I've talked to some people around the league, and you look at Desmond Bland as a guy that the Argos added, under the radar American, who's come up here through the offseason. That's someone that I believe that they're pretty high on. We'll see if it pans out. He's a rookie. You never really know until you get these guys on the field in training camp, but it's one to watch early on just to add a little bit of, let's say, Argos fairness to the conversation.
Well, I think the balance is well taken. I don't think we're being unfair, but fair enough. The balance is
Desmond Bland from the Vegas Nighthawks of
I thought
the
that was,
Indoor Football League.
Personally, I thought that was a very bland addition, but that's just me.
Sorry, balanced was the word I should use. Not, you guys are not being unfair. Balance.
Now we're blended.
Let's go to the next segment.
Yeah.
The Saskatchewan Roughriders lost a ton of talent, but the Riders also got some. Veteran defensive end James Vaughters has agreed to terms with the defending champs, while linebacker Josh Woods and returner James Letcher Jr. are already signed. Should that be enough to quell the panic in Rider Nation?
Yes. Rough Riders fans, relax. You had a league high 44 pending free agents, Jeremy O'Day in the front office re-signed over half of them. And then on Sunday, everybody's freaking out because A.J. Allen, Habakkuk Baldonado, C.J. Rivas, and who's the fourth rider?
Malik Carney, Tommy Neal.
Malik Carney left. But wasn't there one more that went to Ottawa?
Joe Robustelli.
Jake Mayer.
Jake Mayer went to Ottawa.
Mayer. Yeah, 4 guys go to Ottawa. Joe Robustelli, Malik Carney go to Edmonton. Like, that's 6 guys. I'm not saying that they're not talented guys, but you can't pay everybody. And I do really like what we reported as agreed to terms, and then the signing of James Letcher Jr. I couldn't understand why he didn't play in the Grey Cup last year. Perhaps something was going on behind the scenes that we didn't know about. I think he's a guy that's got a lot of upside. He had some absolutely massive seasons when he played in the NCAA, and I think with the Riders and their special teams return units could be a guy that pops in 2026. But this team has a lot of depth and had to make some difficult financial decisions. There was no way that the Riders were going to be able to pay A.J. Allen what he was commanding on the open market and then retain some of the other pieces that Rider Nation would have freaked out about if they left. So I think overall, the additions make sense. You look at James Vaughters, he still had 6 sacks last year, even though it might not have been the flashiest sacks. Hodge would have seen it up close and personal, but he has a relationship with Corey Mace, and Corey Mace has proven, as much as we talk about guys like Scott Milanovic and Ryan Dinwiddie getting all they can out of the quarterbacks, Corey Mace gets almost all that he can, if not everything, out of defensive linemen. So the fact that he knows Vaughters and wants to bring him in there, I think should be a positive if you're a fan of the Saskatchewan Roughriders. And there are guys there that can play some great football. You look at the strong side linebacker position. Was C.J. Rivas really good in all CFL? Yes. But Antoine Brooks Jr. is on a rookie contract and played great football. He played so well that he pushed Rivas to the safety spot. And Rivas definitely played well at safety. But if they're healthy, that's a ratio spot that the Riders have decided on, whether it's Nelson Lacombo or Jackson Ford. So I think overall, for the Riders' communication window period, I'd probably say it was a B, because we knew some people were going to leave, but they also brought in some guys at some key spots. And I think moving forward, the fact that the Riders have been able to retain, again, over half of the pending free agents that they had going into this, which was a league high 44, is impressive in and of itself.
Yeah, I think there's no arguing that the Riders got significantly worse during the window. They had way more talent exiting the building than entering the building. But when you look at the context, right, of being a championship team and having 44 pending free agents, maybe you can criticize and say, well, maybe they should have done a little more work or try to do a little more work before going on a championship run, which changes things sometimes. But at the end of the day, this was always going to be the case for the Riders. They were always going to lose more talent than they got. And that's inevitable. The only thing I will say, which I don't even think is a positive or negative, it's just something that kind of struck me, is this team has essentially the entire Grey Cup offense back. Like, Dante Myers is in the NFL, but Keyshawn Johnson obviously re-signed, would have played that Grey Cup game if he was healthy. Travion Tate is also not under contract, but again, a guy who probably wouldn't have been in the starting lineup were it not for injuries elsewhere. But other than that, the whole starting offense is back. I guess Neal is out too, but Ajoa is a perfect fit to replace him. The defense is going to be way different. And the reason I say that's interesting is because Corey Mace obviously is such a defensive guy. Like, I think if you look at a lot of other coaches, if you're a defensive head coach, you might go to the GM and say, okay, I need all of my guys back on defense, and we'll let the offense sort itself out later, right? Like that would be a normal, I feel like, kind of standard thing for a defensive-minded head coach to do. And it's interesting to me that Corey Mace did the exact opposite, where it was like, yeah, I can plug and play in my defense, and yeah, let's bring the whole offense back. Let's get all these guys back for Mark Mueller. And, it doesn't bother me if 3/4 of our championship D-line isn't back. It doesn't bother me if 2/3 of our championship linebacking core is not back. It doesn't bother me if, a bunch of pieces on the back end change. So that's interesting to me. I'm curious to hear what Corey Mace kind of says to that. I'm hoping to ask him about it at Combine when I get the chance to speak with him again. So again, I think if you strip away the context of the championship and just weigh how many guys came into the organization versus out, yeah, the Riders got kind of hammered, but I think that they deserve a solid C plus, B minus type of grade, just given the context of, hey, when you're the top dogs, it's impossible to keep everybody. And they kept a ton of key players in that building. And it does seem as though where they've lost some of their guys, they do have incumbents who they're high on.
The best way to frame it in my mind is the Riders are not nearly as deep anymore as they were last season. But that's okay because the Riders in 2025 may have been the deepest CFL team that I've ever seen. We talked about it throughout the season about how much talent they had at various positions. Receiver is one that jumps out to me, where they were 2 or 3 guys deep who were starter level players for other organizations, but they couldn't get them on the field because it took an injury to take somebody else off. Joe Robustelli, probably going to be a starter in Edmonton. I don't know that he would have started for the Riders next year. He wasn't a full-time starter for them last year because of their depth. Tommy Neal, as much as he rose with the team as the season went on because of injuries to other Canadians, I don't know if he would have been a day one starter if he had re-signed with the Riders, because they've got a Joe and Keelan Schaefer-Baker and Sam Emilus all on that roster, guys who should command starting minutes in that receiving core. So it's okay to let one of those guys walk out of the building. It's okay to let Mario Elford go when you've got James Letcher Jr. coming in, who I think has a ton of upside as a young returner. And I like the addition of Josh Woods to that linebacking core. As much as it hurts to lose A.J. Allen, I think Aubrey Miller Jr., who showed some flashes last year, certainly performed on special teams and had some reps on defense, has a lot of upside for that spot. And Woods has done it. He started most of the season last year for BC, and I don't think we've seen him fully recover yet from the ACL injury that kept him out of most of the 2024 season, when a lot of people thought he was going to emerge as one of the better linebackers in the league because of what he did in the playoffs the year before. He still has time to bounce back from that injury. It often takes a full year for guys to really get back to their full potential. And if he reaches where we thought he could have reached in BC, then you've got a very high quality player at that weak side linebacker position beside Jameer Thurman. So they have options there.
That's an under the radar signing. And sorry, JC, continue.
Yeah, no, it is an under the radar signing. The spot that to me is the most concern is defensive end, because you lose both Carney and Habakkuk Baldonado. I think that is difficult to overcome, particularly Shane Ray is no longer there, or has not re-signed, I should say. Fodders helps you out on one side, but I don't know who the starter is on the other side. Is that going to be Aaron Patrick, who played towards the end of last season? I know they toyed with it being a ratio spot in the past, but Lake Corte Moore, of course, is coming off that season-ending injury. Is he going to be ready to make that jump? I'm not sure about that. That will be the one spot in my mind that the Riders are going to have to make a decision and find somebody, is who is that defensive end opposite James Vaughters? Because right now, I don't know.
You're right. That is the spot. And Hodge, I just want to correct your wording earlier. The entire secondary is back. The secondary is not any different other than CJ Rivas leaving at safety, because it was a ratio spot earlier in the season with Nelson Lacombo or Jackson Ford. All those guys in the secondary are back. Marcus Sales, Devon Campbell, DeMarcus Fields, Roland Milligan Jr. So that base is there. JC is spot on. I think they're going to find a guy at weak side linebacker with the way that they've scouted and the way that we know Mace can develop those guys on his defense, and Josh Bell as well. I think one of those two guys are the odds-on favorite to be the starter at weak side linebacker, Aubrey Miller Jr. or Josh Woods. But JC, you're right on the money there. They are going to have to develop or find an up-and-coming pass rusher that's already on the roster. There's a couple guys that it could be. We'll see. They're going to bring in some other guys as well. But if I'm Corey Mace sitting there, it's like, man, our offense is a beast, looks really good. The offensive line pretty much stays intact, and they could probably even bring back Travion Tate if they wanted to, who did start in the Grey Cup game. But all they got to do is find one pass rusher. I think Corey Mace is probably confident that he can do that. Like, look what he turned Malik Carney into in his defense. I'm not saying that Carney wasn't good before, because he was pretty good, but I think Mace helped take him to another level. So that will be a major focal point for the Rough Riders, is finding not even just one, but multiple capable guys who are going to be able to get after the passer consistently in Mace's defense.
Yeah, I was just for the record specifically talking about the Grey Cup secondary. So you're right. There's only one change, and yes, Nelson Lecomble's still there. I was just referencing the last unit that we saw on the field, if that makes sense.
The Calgary Stampeders were relatively quiet during the negotiation window, agreeing to terms with Edmonton defensive back Devondrick Bynum and Canadian receiver Dejan Brissett. Running back Deonta McMahon will also be joining the team after he was released by Toronto. Should Stamps fans have cause for concern, though, with the lack of activity?
I mean, I think you have to talk about Deonta McMahon first, just because they already named the stadium after him. Like, talk about
it's McMahon,
instant.
though. It's not the same.
I was making a joke. Oh, whatever. Ruined now.
I love how they tried to play that off as a pun, though, in the signing release, but we all know that it's pronounced differently, which is
this is true.
Funny to me.
Look, I think that when you look at the Stampeders going into 2025, none of us knew what Jalen Hutchings was going to be. None of us knew what Jacob Roberts was going to be, right? And these are guys who played so well on the defensive side of the football, were so disruptive, that they're now in the NFL, which is awesome news for them. And it's great news for the Stampeders that their scouting department was able to find such dominant rookies. And what I'll say is I hope for their sake they could do it again, because I was kind of surprised at how inactive this group was. This wasn't a group that, before free agency started, went out and signed, 3, 4, 5 free agents who got early releases. Like, this is a team that they added Dejan Brissett. I love that signing. He's a perfect replacement for Damian Alford. They can still play 3 Canadian receivers if they want, start them. Other than that, like you pick up Bynum off the scrap heap. McMahon is kind of like the new Peyton Logan, I guess, in a way, because he's obviously not going to start. Dedrick Mills is your starter. He was great in 2025. So maybe there are some, internal guys who they know about, right? Again, this time last year, they were, I think, chuckling behind the scenes, knowing that Jalen Hutchings was about to set the league on fire, knowing that Jacob Roberts was about to be a complete game changer at will. And this team, I do want to point out, did a great job in extending a lot of its key players, right? They extended Derek Moncrief, who's coming off a renaissance season, Dedrick Mills, who was brilliant. They extended Tevin Jones, who's rock solid, Markel Lee, who I thought played really well this past season, Clarence Hicks, one of the top edge rushers in the league. They've brought back Eric Brooks, who I thought had a breakout season in the receiving corps. Bryce Bell, he's been banged up, but he can play tackle, guard, or center. He's like the most versatile offensive lineman in the league. He's like the new Spencer Wilson, right? So I like a lot of what they did before free agency, but I was expecting the Calgary Stampeders to be a little more active. This is a team that had a huge bounce back in 2025. I'm not trying to take anything away from that, but they signed one player who was in our top 50, and that was Brissett. Everybody else, like their other additions are minimal, and the guys who they added were not players who factored even into our conversation for the top 50. So I was surprised to see the Calgary Stampeders not be more active, right? We've seen other teams in the West Division do a much better job, at least in my opinion, of rebuilding for 2026 or reloading for 2026. I was surprised to see the Calgary Stampeders didn't do more.
That's a fair criticism, Hodge, because what they lost, not necessarily in free agency, but to the NFL, is so significant. When you look at that defensive line last year, at one point when they were firing on all cylinders, that line was Clarence Hicks, Jalen Hutchings, Miles Brown, Folarin Orimolade. That is an unbelievable unit. Now, Hutchings has gone to the NFL, And Flo is not going to be ready for the start of next season in all likelihood because of his injury. He may not play for the bulk of the year. So who replaces those two guys? You still got Hicks and Brown. Those are two fantastic players. You have Wiley at the one end spot who's played a little bit. To me, he's not necessarily a world beater, but somebody who's competent in that spot. So perhaps you're comfortable there. But at the other defensive tackle position, you're going to have to find somebody. Or are you starting Justin Sambu and making it a ratio spot? Like, to me, that doesn't make a lot of sense. I wouldn't be super comfortable with that. You need to find somebody there. And they didn't add anybody in free agency at either end or tackle to make their lives easier. At linebacker, replacing Jacob Roberts, I think they'll probably go with the duo of Markwell Lee and Kyle Wilson, who are both competent players, but I would like to see them add some depth there. I do like the signing of Devondrick Bynum, although I don't know what will come from it. Him coming off of injury, he could be an upgrade over Anthony Johnson at one of the corner spots. But when you look at what was lost and the step that the Stampeders took last year, you better hope that scouting department found at least that many guys again. And as much as Calgary had the reputation during their dynastic era of being able to recycle and replace guys through the scouting department, last year was the anomaly over the last decade because they haven't been able to do that consistently since 2018. We'll have to see if it was sign of things to come, a return to a bygone era, or if this team is going to struggle to find the bodies to replace what they've lost.
That's the question for me, JC, is did the Calgary Stampeders revert to what they've always done and be bargain shoppers? I don't think they're as close to as deep as the Saskatchewan Roughriders to potentially be able to do that. But then on the flip side, perhaps there are some people, as you've laid out, that are in the building there that they believe can step into some of those key spots. To be determined if that's going to be the case and if the Stampeders will be able to keep up in the West Division with some of the teams I thought that Hodge put it aptly are reloading to contend, plus with the teams at the top. We're going to find out when the regular season kicks off.
And just to be specific, like, I don't want to just vaguely criticize. So to be very specific, I thought this team should have been all in on AJ Allen. Like, this is a team that Micah Tights in its linebacking core a lot. And I think Micah Tights is a very serviceable player, but I think AJ Allen is better. I think AJ Allen is on the upswing. And what better way to try to catch the Saskatchewan Roughriders for first place in the West than say, oh yeah, I just picked your pocket, right? I think everybody knew, within a week or two of free agency that given the other signings that the Saskatchewan Roughriders made on extensions, they weren't going to be able to bring back Allen. I would have loved to see the Saskatchewan Roughriders, the Calgary Stampeders pull that off. I think that would have been brilliant. Didn't happen, right? And that's a signing in particular I would have loved to see as the Stampeders look to continue the ferociousness of that defense that, again, by no fault of their own, got picked off by the NFL. The Montreal Alouettes stuck to depth additions during the window, agreeing to terms with receiver Jareth Stearns and backup quarterback Dustin Crum. The Owls also came close to an extension with safety Marc-Antoine Dequoy, but he ultimately decided to retire at the age of 31. How much will his loss hurt the Grey Cup runners-up?
I don't think it will hurt them very much. As we laid out in sort of our free agency preview shows, the Alouettes have plenty of depth at that safety position. You've got a guy incumbent in Arthur Hamlin, who I think has played quality minutes when asked to there. You have a guy you drafted last year in Nate Beauchemin, who won the President's Trophy, playing safety for the University of Calgary. And of course, you just signed Jonathan Sutherland, who you've waited multiple years to get in the building and who is a safety. I think they have enough depth there that they're going to be just fine with losing Marc-Antoine Dequoy. Is it going to hurt them from a leadership standpoint? I think probably. You're losing a vocal player in that room, somebody who was a voice for the Francophone community that, Jason Moss has tried to imbue in his roster of how important it is that the Alouettes represent that community. You've lost an important component there, but on the field, I think they have the players to replace him. And I don't think that they lost all that much in terms of what's heading out the door. Players reportedly departing. Scott Hutter, yeah, another safety, but a guy who only played a handful of games last year, wasn't really in their plans. James Letcher Jr., I thought was underrated by the Alouettes as a returner, but they made it very clear throughout the season that they didn't want him back. And Dylan Wynn, who has had a tremendous CFL career as a defensive tackle, but I think is a little bit past it. None of those losses scare me or hurt me. I think they've done a wonderful job at retaining the rest of their roster. And then you add a piece in Jarreth Stearns, who can either be depth or receiver or start as needed, with Austin Mack leaving this offseason. And then Dustin Crum, who I think is going to be a very nice backup behind Davis Alexander. If he struggles with injury again in the future, he's somebody who has starting experience and can step in, but he's also a guy who's well suited to that short yardage role that Caleb Evans has done so well for so many years. He's a really good, well-rounded addition in my mind to sit in behind Alexander on that QB hierarchy.
Marc-Antoine Dequoy made some clutch plays for the Alouettes over his time with Montreal, and it's hard for guys to step up and do that. And I get it, there is some depth there. JC laid out all the names, but when the times are the biggest and the moments are the largest, Marc-Antoine Dequoy was consistently there for the Alouettes, namely to help them win a Grey Cup in 2023 and really help that team become a legitimate, consistent contender. So those guys, you talked about it, Boschman and Hamlin and Sutherland, are going to have to be able to make some of those plays in the secondary. Not all the time and not right away, but Marc-Antoine Dequoy, just ask Chad Kelly, was able to flip games on their head in a moment's notice because of his leadership, tenacity, film study, quickness, and ultimately speed, taking back some of these pick sixes or long interception returns that he's had. Plus, Montreal loses the star power. There is no doubt about it, especially after his rant following the Grey Cup win in Hamilton, where at the start of the week there was no French signage around the stadium, that he became an absolute, and I'm going to say it because it's true, superstar in Quebec. The people love him there, and rightfully so. He's a proud Quebecer, and I think he's a guy that you could see easily having a career in the media if that's something that he wants. So it's easy to say that, yeah, you can put another body in there, and I'm not saying that those guys aren't talented, but Marc-Antoine Dequoy made some big-time plays that Montreal Alouettes fans will remember forever, and whoever's stepping in there is going to be tasked with making plays at least close to that big. Perhaps there's going to be other players that step up in other positions. I'm not saying it just needs to be the safety, but Marc-Antoine Dequoy made some absolutely unbelievable plays, otherworldly plays, I would say, for a safety in this league. He was a guy that had legit 4.3 speed, I believe it was, especially on a hand time. Went to training camp with the Green Bay Packers, was looked at as a cornerback. I think that could have been another position that he would have played at a high level in the Canadian Football League. And I think most fitting for Dequoy is the fact that he gets to walk away on his own terms. He had 2 contract offers on the table, but ultimately didn't feel like his body was ready for the sacrifice that it takes to play at his high level. I completely understand that. You have to be committed to playing football at that level. Otherwise, you shouldn't even step on the field. I'm only saying I understand it from a university level, certainly not to Marc-Antoine Dequoy's level. So he will be missed from a sheer star power perspective. As for some of the other additions, I think Jarreth Stearns, if he can stay healthy, can be a sneaky good addition. He was really good in Saskatchewan when he got an opportunity and just, couldn't consistently stay on the field in Winnipeg. And I love the addition of Dustin Crum. I think it fits in so many different ways. And he's got a connection with Marshall Desjardins, who was the general manager in Ottawa, that added him to the negotiation list before he came up to the CFL with the Redblacks. So as JC laid out, he can be a solid backup quarterback. He can fill that short yardage role, sort of a dual threat guy that way. And last year, low key, man, he completed over 70% of his passes. Like, I think this guy still has some upside as an all around quarterback. It makes some sense in terms of his style. It fits with Davis Alexander in that offense. And I think Jason Moss will love how gritty that guy is, because for as difficult as the Red Blacks season was last year, going 4-14, that guy never said die. And I think Jason Moss will absolutely love that in Dustin Crum.
Yeah, sometimes I think having a backup who's wildly different than your starter can be an advantage on like a quarter-to-quarter basis, right? Like if you prep to reference a duo from a few years ago from McLeod Bethel Thompson, and then you get Trey Ford in the second half, like that's a real big challenge to overcome. But I also think that having a starter and a backup who play the exact same way can be advantage on like a season-long scale, where it's like, okay, our starter got hurt, but we don't have to completely reconfigure the offense because these two guys have the same skill set. And in my opinion, I mean, I think Davis Alexander is much more polished than Dustin Crum, but they do play the game in similar ways. And so I'm excited to see if Jason Moss, who obviously with the help of his coaching staff had a ton of success developing Davis Alexander from, an FCS quarterback who showed up a few years ago on the practice roster to being arguably a top 3 starting quarterback in the CFL. I'm interested to see if he can still take a guy like Dustin Crum, who's relatively young in his career, and turn him into more than he is today. So all in all, like, I'm not blown away, of course, by what the Alouettes added, but this is a team that was very good when Davis Alexander was healthy in 2025, and they lost very little. So I'm not I'm middling on this grade. I guess if I were to grade them, I'd give them maybe a B-. Losing Dequoy is not at all this team's fault. You have to count Austin Mack in there because they did move on from him. But other than that, like this team, again, didn't add much, didn't lose much. This is how I think Danny Machocha, the team's general manager, wants this team to operate on a year-to-year basis. He doesn't want to take big swings. He doesn't want to have a bunch of guys who are out each year. He wants this team to be consistent, and certainly that is the case for the Alouettes heading into 2026.
One focus that Machocha has had, and I just thought of this when you were talking about it, Hodge, is extending the players he wants early. He doesn't really even let them get near free agency. And I think that's a benefit certainly for the team. And as you said, they're not going out and spending big dollars, or at least feeling like they have to in free agency. So it's a different approach, I would say, that Machocha has employed, but also that front office has been really good at finding talent when people thought that they were going to be the worst team in the Canadian Football League in 2023, when there was ownership uncertainty and guys were leaving the team, like Geno Lewis, just to name one. So I think that's a strategy that has worked well for the Alouettes to become and stay a consistent contender in the East Division.
And I'll jump in there really quick. I've had this conversation with people in the past who work in front offices, and they love the midseason extension because sometimes, you think, okay, this guy, he could maybe get 140 on the open market. And then all of a sudden free agency hits and, the talent at that position gets really thin. And all of a sudden your guy is getting a $2,000 or $200,000 offer from somewhere else. And you're going, oh my God, like we wanted this guy back. We budgeted 140 and now our offer is getting blown out of the water and he's gone. So sometimes if you can convince guys to re-sign with you early and avoid the market altogether, that's the best way to keep that core together. And I think you're bang on. That's exactly what Danny Machocha's done. That was part of my criticism of the Riders. I thought they should have done a bit of a better job of that through the year, but everybody's got different styles, and this is clearly what's worked well for the Alouettes.
The BC Lions have yet to have a single agreed-upon deal reported after the team pulled an offer to defensive back Demario Houston. However, the Leos did add offensive tackle Isaiah Cage after a year out of football. Are you surprised at how quiet things have been in Vancouver?
No, because this is what happened last year. Ryan Rigmaiden in the front office kept it close to the vest, and then there were some signings that were announced officially when they're actually allowed to be putting pen to paper after CFL free agency, the market, I should say, open. But the BC Lions are paying some guys some big dollars, and I don't necessarily think have major holes to fill. I mean, certainly we'll talk about that left tackle spot with Jarrell Broxton leaving as a focus, but a lot of the heavy lifting for the BC Lions was done retaining their own players and then adding a guy like Darnell Sankey, who became free because of a ratio change essentially in Montreal. So I really like that move. I think it upgrades them in the linebacking core. They retain some key guys like Keon Hatcher. They signed Nathan Rourke to an extension. Matthew Betts is under contract for some big dollars. So I think when you look at this roster, you start to understand why they've been so quiet. Not to say that they couldn't make any moves when the market opens, but it makes a lot of sense. Certainly there's going to be a focus on that left tackle spot, as I said, with Broxton leaving. I'll let JC speak to that more in depth, but overall, not surprised about BC being quiet.
Yeah, I think this team does deserve criticism for letting Jarrell Broxton go, right? He's been in Vancouver for 5 seasons. He's grown into the best offensive tackle, arguably, in the CFL. He was the highest graded pass blocking offensive tackle in the CFL as per Pro Football Focus in 2025. And those are the types of players that it's not impossible to replace them in a year, but it's really tough. And I thought Chris Schluger, who's been there for a few years now, struggled a bit at tackle. I know Corey Woodruff, who started at guard, looked pretty good there. Might be able to kick out to tackle, but you're just not going to get a player of Broxton's caliber. The departure of Aiden Eberhardt doesn't really bother me. That's not to say he's not a good player, but he's the number 3 in this offense, right? Keon Hatcher and Justin McInnes make the big bucks for a reason. And finding, a receiver to slot into that 3rd or 4th role is something your scouting department should be able to do each year. Losing Broxton, really tough. I do love the early additions of Sankey and Sales, but to me, I don't know if you're the BC Lions, how you let Jarrell Broxton out the door, much less to a division rival. That part of it, to me, makes it even worse.
There is no way to get around it. Losing Broxton hurts. It hurts a lot. There is no way to replace him exactly as he was, because he was the best left tackle in all of the CFL. Simply put, the guy was a brick wall on the blind side of your franchise quarterback, and now they're going to have to move some things around. Obviously, Dejon Allen is back. I think they'll probably keep him at right tackle, although theoretically they could flip him to the other side. Chris Schluger has started at tackle. That's an option. Corey Woodruff, of course, as you mentioned, has played tackle in the past, although he has largely been their starting left guard. And then you get into the other options with Isaac Cage, who they just signed, Tyron Hunt, who spent much of the year on the practice roster last year, and Brandon Yates, who started one game at guard when Woodruff was out at tackle. I think they're really high on those guys that they're bringing back from the practice roster, so perhaps there is a solution there. Losing Eberhardt does not really concern me. He was 3rd in yardage on the team, Hodge, but he was 6th in receptions. Like, this was not a guy who was making a lot of catches for you. He was making big-time catches. He made plays down the field. I thought he was a valuable contributor for this offense, but there are ways to find and plug that hole with other guys who are either on the roster already or who will be brought in before training camp. What really concerned me about the lack of movement from the Lions is the guys that they missed out on, and specifically missing out on a upgrade at backup quarterback. The BC Lions were involved heavily in the negotiations for both Trey Ford and Dustin Crum. They didn't get either of those 2 players, and they had to bring back Chase Bryce, who was the number 3 behind Jeremiah Mazzoli when Nathan Rourke went down last season. To me, Bryce is not a viable solution as an insurance policy to Rourke on his own. You need a veteran backup quarterback, and you missed out on 2 of the best ones on the market. Is McLeod Bethel-Thompson potentially an option here? That would seem to be the one that makes the most sense out of who is remaining. But at this stage, you don't have one. And if Nathan Rourke goes down, this organization is SCREWED, screwed. They are absolutely screwed unless they have Nathan Rourke under center. To me, that makes it a D of a day for the BC Lions because they missed out on two players who could have really helped them in a worst case scenario.
All right, let's provide a little balance here, okay? Because there is a thing called the salary cap. And as I laid out, the Lions are paying some big dollars to some high-level players. And not everything's necessarily in your control as it relates to the backup quarterback position. Trey Ford seemed very intrigued by the BC Lions pitch. But when you're Ford and you're looking at Nathan Rourke being the franchise guy there for essentially however long he's going to play at a high level, it makes sense for Ford to go to Hamilton. Plus, it's an hour away from his hometown and an hour away from his university. And his wife's family is from Sudbury, so they're back in Ontario and not flying all over the country with two daughters. So that's not within Ryan Rigmaiden's control or the BC Lions' control. I think they put their best foot forward. Trey Ford thought they had a fantastically talented team, a great coaching staff. He could have seen himself developing and improving his game with Buck Pierce, but Hamilton just made too much sense. And then I think with Dustin Crum, we talked about it. He already had a connection with Marcel Desjardins. He doesn't have to go through a massive change in terms of going out to the West Coast. Ottawa is very close to Montreal and familiar to him for the amount of times that the Redblacks have played there. So I'm not going to lay all the fault at Ryan Rigmaiden's feet. When it comes to Broxton, at some point, you have to fit within the salary cap. And we talked about the big dollars that they're doling out across this team. And yes, Nathan Rourke remains the highest paid player in the Canadian Football League. And part of that money that he's going to get is in the form of marketing money. But still, the BC Lions are going to be a competitive team. I get it. They do need to find a backup quarterback. But if you break down the situations, I think you can understand why Trey Ford went to Hamilton and why Dustin Crum went to Montreal. I think the one that you could talk about more is Taylor Powell if he was willing to come west, but then he has a familiarity with Ed Hervey and Spencer Zimmerman. So I'm not absolving them of all of it here, but I'm saying there are other factors at play, and the BC Lions definitely do need a backup quarterback, and there is, without a doubt, a downgrade, a major one, at left tackle.
I get that it's not all on the Lions front office, that these players have free will and have made decisions that make a lot of sense for them and make, frankly, more sense than coming to the BC Lions. My point is, if you're going to be involved in those sweepstakes for those backup quarterbacks, because clearly you understand that it is a desperate need for your team, then I think there were moves that they made earlier in free agency that maybe they didn't have to make that could have freed up enough money for them to make an offer to one of these backups that they couldn't have refused. I look at somebody like Sione Tehema, who got brought back on a new contract at defensive end, and I look at the way that their roster's built, and I say, do we really need Sione Tehema to be making the money that he's making when Levi Bell and Bradley Ane were so good down the stretch last year and are still on rookie deals? I think they have added pieces, or they've re-signed their guys. They've done a wonderful job getting those players back, but in some cases, they've paid a little bit more than they had to, and I think they could have done a better job prioritizing money for that backup QB position. And frankly, if Nathan Rourke doesn't get hurt, it doesn't matter, right? This team is going to be a playoff contender. They're going to be a Grey Cup contender every single year that Nathan Rourke is on the field because he is that good. And I think that is part of the logic of where the BC Lions are going with it. But if he does get hurt, you are in serious trouble. And then it becomes a situation where you are looking for the next best available option and struggling to find something. Like the Lions last season, when Rourke was out for those 2 games, were not a good football team. When Rourke was on the field, they were a good football team. That's the difference. And you can't be put in that situation again.
The Lions were a really good football team with Nathan Rourke on the field. And there's some options out there. You talked about McLeod Bethel-Thompson, and I think possibly Caleb Evans could fit there
once
as
he's healthy,
well.
yeah.
But yes, once he's healthy. But at some point, you got to develop some of these guys. So I know you're down on Chase Bryce here without saying it, but it's not always guys coming in this league and looking great right away. There's so many stories that people talk about in terms of the ups and the downs. Like Trevor Harris was a backup quarterback not long ago, and then he just won his first Grey Cup with the Saskatchewan Roughriders. Same thing for Cody Fajardo, the flip that he went through going to Edmonton as a backup and now the franchise guy. I'm not saying Chase Bryce is going to be a franchise guy, but sometimes some players need a little more time, okay, Cheese? Let it marinate a little bit, just like you like to do with your hamburgers before you put the cheese on it.
I think there are some other options, right? I don't think any of them blow the doors off, but like, could Cameron Dukes end up in BC? Could Shea Patterson end up in BC? Mm-hmm. None of these are guys who you'd want to go to the Grey Cup with, but they're all guys who might be able to tread water for a couple games if Nathan Rourke misses
Cameron
time.
Dukes did it with the Argos.
He did it with the Argos and was a perfectly 500 starter, right? So we're not saying that the Lions need to go out and add the second coming of Warren Moon here. They just need to find a guy who can tread water. Because let's be honest, JC's saying, well, they're screwed if Nathan Rourke gets hurt. Well, it's like, well, if Nathan Rourke is out long term, the Lions are screwed regardless of who the backup is. Like Nathan Rourke, there's only one of him. And until cloning technology catches up, there's only ever going to be one of him. Though, mind you, Curtis Rourke is out there. BC doesn't have his rights. So anyway, I was surprised the Lions weren't more active. Yes, there's a cap, but Dunk, you're forgetting. It's only 1 year ago that the Lions said, cap, that's crap. We're spending all the money. We're giving up the draft picks. We don't care. We're living it up. We're racking up the visa bill, and I don't care when it comes due. Now, it didn't end up in a championship, but at least they pushed as hard as they could. I was expecting a little more of that. Again, I still think the Lions are a good team, but this is a 4-horse race in the West Division last year, and the Elks, who are out of that race this past season, got a whole lot better, I think, this offseason. So I think the Lions, yes, they've got the best player. I just wish that they'd been a little, I think they should have pushed a little harder. I think they could have done it, and they didn't. So that took me aback a bit. It wasn't a disaster, but I expected them to be more productive in free agency.
And I think either of you guys tread water?
I could tread water really well.
We could probably both do it better than you because
I can tread water with my hands out for an hour.
Low. Exactly.
I didn't say float. I said tread water.
Yeah.
Treading water is like mostly floating.
No, it's not.
Yeah, it is.
No.
Well,
completely
Hodge.
Different things.
If you're floating, why do you have to tread water? You're just floating.
Oh boy. You gotta get the egg beater going.
Get the egg beater going.
PB&J like you're riding a bike. Spread the PB&J. Ride that bike.
Several
baby.
top players remain without deals in place, including Canadian receiver
What are you doing, Hodge?
Junior. I'm bringing in the next segment. You guys are off the rails. American receiver Dominic Rhymes, veteran QB McLeod Bethel Thompson. We didn't talk about him yet. Linebacker Jovan Santos Knox and veteran running back William Stanback. We'll start with Dunk. Which unsigned player are you most intrigued to see land somewhere?
Man, I was going to add some other names to the list, but then you just
you can
took
go
over
off
the
list.
segment. No,
you can go off the list.
I think Lorenzo Malden deserves to be in that discussion. I think he's a guy that still has some upside in the Canadian Football League, but the obvious one, like, come on, we would all say it. It's Curly Gittens Jr., right? Mm-hmm. A legitimate starting Canadian who has 1,000-yard season on his resume, has been an all-star before, is a guy that we touched on earlier, could fit in Hamilton, could fit in Toronto, could fit on other teams around the Canadian Football League. I think could potentially be a fit and give some, ratio depth to other Canadian Football League teams. So that one's obvious. But for me, I'll circle back to Lorenzo Malden. I still think he's got some juice there. And he did play in Calgary, and you guys talked about Folarin or Malade being out for a chunk of the season. I think that would be a natural fit for him to potentially go back there. I'm not saying that that's going to happen, but I thought that was a smart trade by the Stampeders, actually on both fronts, because the Redblacks got some draft capital for a guy that was a pending free agent anyways. So, I think that could make some sense. I think it could make some sense in some other places for people who need pass rush ability. And, I'll be quite honest, like some people might laugh at this, but we talked a lot about the lack of pass rush ability on some of these teams. And Sean Lemon wants to continue playing football, even as a rotational pass rush guy. Honestly, like, how do you not bring that guy in? And there's a bunch of teams in that situation. If you're the Toronto Argonauts, how do you not have Sean Lemon on your roster? Like, he's shown on a per game basis that he can get after the passer. And I'm not saying he has to be an every down defensive end for you, but there's other teams out there like the Hamilton Tiger Cats. The Calgary Stampeders would fit that as well. If you're just looking for a guy that can get after the passer, I don't care if he's 37 years old. He's shown that he can rush the quarterback. So I understand that there's reservations about his age, but that's one name that I would focus on just because we've talked about it with a bunch of teams now that they could use pass rush help.
Yeah, there's a number of pass rushers out there. Among the two you mentioned, Anthony Lanier is another one, although I'm not sure what his current health status is. There is a lot of, there's players who could help you if they're willing to accept depth contracts at that position. And I think there's a number of teams who have needs for more depth and who could take a flyer on a guy who maybe isn't the same player that he once was, but is still going to be a more consistent option than the current players that you have and can help bring along some young rookies. I think another guy who jumps out, obviously Curly Gittins Jr. is the top of the receiver market, but Dominic Rhymes. This is a guy who led the Calgary Stampeders in receiving yards last year. I know it was a bit of a down year for him, but he's still somebody who can be, a productive receiver, an outside mismatch because of his size, and is just a year removed from being a 1,000-yard guy with the Ottawa Redblacks. You don't want him to be your number one anymore, but if you're looking to add a number 2 or a number 3, he would be one of the first people that I would call, and I'm surprised to see that he hasn't landed somewhere yet.
I think that a lot of people are asking about Dalton Schoen right now, at least in Winnipeg. I don't believe Dalton Schoen is going to play a down in 2026 due to his knee situation, which obviously limits his value. Now, I'm hoping that we'll be able to tell the full Dalton Schoen story over the next week or so. So that's a bit of a tease. I agree. Curly Gittins Jr. is the top. There's some other guys, but since we're going off the list, guys, Charleston Rambo, I've been led to believe more focused maybe on the NFL right now than the CFL, but a guy who looked like he was going to be a 1,000-yard guy, like an unbelievable player, right? In Montreal, was set to do some big things. And obviously that has not come to fruition, at least yet, with a contract for 2026. And then Shamar Bridges to stay with the receiver. Like, this guy won most outstanding rookie last year. Like, is he not
in the East?
Well, in the East, but still, like, I'm worried he's going to become the next
2 years.
Just over a year ago. I'm worried he's going to become the next Frank Cutolo, where he wins Rookie of the Year, is sensational, and then does nothing.
Shout out Frank Cutolo.
He was great. I did an interview with him a couple years ago. Frank Cutolo was great to me, and it was all injuries that just hampered him. But anyway, I digress. Anything else, boys?
I want to add one more name. Sean McEwen, if he's healthy after his ACL tear last year in training camp with the Riders, I think has the upside still to be a starting caliber offensive lineman in this league. And at the very least, a great number 6 or 7 on your roster, depending if you're a team that carries a 6th or 7th offensive lineman. So I think him still being out there is a guy that could be valuable for some teams across the league.
And Josh Coker is another one that I think is worth mentioning, who to me is in the top half of tackles in the CFL, if not the top third, but suffered a knee injury late last year, probably not going to be ready to go for much of 2026. That limits his value. Maybe he doesn't get signed right away. Maybe he's a late add, but somebody who, when healthy, I think is an upgrade over a number of the tackles that are currently penciled in as starters across the CFL.
Hodge, any other names you want to add?
No, not really. Like, there's lots of talent available. I don't want to be disrespectful to anybody who's not out there or we haven't mentioned yet who's still out there. Like Adam O'Clair has done some great things in this league. Obviously, he didn't have a great year in 25, was hurt with the Lions. But no, I think we've done a great job of listing a lot of the best guys who are available, and a lot of these guys are going to sign contracts. I don't think we've seen the last of them, but yeah, I think we've done a great job covering this, and I'm curious for feedback from folks. Obviously, like everything that you see on socials, like the YouTube video, subscribe to the newsletter, leave us some comments. What are your thoughts on free agency? What did we grade too high? What did we grade too low? All those good things. Go ahead, Justin.
I was going to say real quick, hit subscribe on the YouTube channel. It's going up, but we've had some exclusive one-on-ones on there. Hodge teased one with Dalton Schoen, and we'll try to get as many more as we can throughout the off season. So make sure you hit subscribe, especially on YouTube, to make sure you get that content when it's up there. Get it to you right away. Get the alerts to your phone or computer, wherever you want to watch it.